Just to start with, thank you all for being here today. We really appreciate your interest in our webinars. My name is Claire Ladd, and I'm the Programs and Services Manager at the Mass Nonprofit Network, or MNN. And just quickly to give a little bit of background about us at MNN for those who aren't familiar, our three goals are to strengthen the nonprofit sector through advocacy, public awareness, and capacity building services. And as part of our capacity building efforts, we offer these regular webinars in partnership with our affiliate members. So please stay tuned for future webinars and let us know if there's any topics you would particularly like to see us cover. Our efforts are made possible by our more than 600 member organizations. So thanks so much to all of you who are members. We really appreciate your partnership. And if you have not yet joined, but would like to take advantage of all the networking opportunities, cost savings, events, etc., you can visit massnonprofitnet.org/join to find out more, or just reach out to me. All right, so for today's webinar, it's titled Strategic Grant Writing, Maximizing Results, Minimizing Stress the Don't Worry Way. And this presentation will be presented by Victoria Flynn of Victoria Flynn Consulting. So I will now hand it over to Victoria to get us started.
Good morning, everybody. I'm really glad you're here. I'm excited to talk to you today. I hope you definitely add questions to the Q&A box as we go. I've got a lot of information, and I hopefully will be getting through all of it, and we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. I'm going to share my screen so that we can get the presentation started. Okay. For today, my agenda is a little introduction about myself, talking about strategy and why it works and what the impact of really focusing on the wrong things, those wrong worries can be. I think you probably have a long list of why the wrong worries are already slowing you down at work and having creating some hard mountains to summit when you're a grant program. But then we're going to get into the meat of it, and we're going to talk grant strategy and the things that I do as an independent consultant to make sure my clients are winning as much as they can and working in all the right ways. I'll talk about 3 case studies from organizations I've worked with personally, and then we'll do the Q&A and wrap things up. So I am an independent grant writer and nonprofit consultant. I work with a range of organizations across sectors. I've worked with human services organizations, arts organizations, education, municipalities, everywhere and back. My clients are often East Coast based, but I've had West Coast clients and people all the way in the middle. And I've worked with very small organizations and large organizations as well. Larger organizations up to about 5 million, nearing $6 million in size. I have been, my roles with those organizations have varied. I've worked as a fractional development director, sort of filling in the gaps. I've worked as the grants person who is really running the grants program as a consultant fairly independently. And I've also been the support person depending on how the development department works. I'm also a board member, a Girl Scout leader, PTO mom. I do too much. But all of these things have really affected how I approach grants, how I approach my own work and my workload. And it really shows, I feel like, in the way my clients have seen success in the last couple of years. I've raised 2.3 million with them since 2022. So how do we do this? Well, I think the importance of a good strategy really can't be understated. There are a few things that we all know about grants. Grants are never really free money. The amount of work you put in, the amount of stress you put in, the amount of waiting, and the no promises aspect of applying for grants really means that you have to spend a lot of your resources, whether you are a big organization or a small organization, chasing these grants and finding the ones that are right for you. And if your budget includes grant income, you've committed to applying for grants. So, these are a reality. Grants are a reality of most organizations, and a lot of organizations are trying to add them or add the amount of money that is being brought in by grants. Um, but if you aren't tackling this strategically, then you're really up against some of those really big, tough realities about the grant world. The national win rate for all organizations, big, small, and in between, is about 20% right now. That means that if for every 5 grants you're applying to, you might get 4 no's. And even if you get a yes, winning doesn't mean you get all of the money you've asked for. And then you actually have to deliver the program, whether or not you've gotten all the money you need. So submitting as many applications as possible can sound like the best way to go so that you're beating the numbers, but it doesn't actually guarantee greater success. It's not about rolls of the dice. It really is how you approach things, how you work, how your organization fits. And when you lose track of those things and you're instead worrying about the things that you can't control as an organization, as a grant writer in the organization or independently, you really have a lot to deal with. You losing a lot means that you're stressing out about how much money's coming in or not. You are possibly losing time on opportunities that aren't really a great fit. It doesn't feel great to any of us to lose. So it can really be a ding on your confidence if you are applying for a lot of stuff and not getting where you need to be. And of course, when you're focusing on a pile of grants you decided to apply for here, there's always a pile that you aren't going to get to. So you sometimes you're also losing other opportunities that might be a better fit. I love this quote about strategy, and I think about this a lot as a solopreneur and when I'm talking to my clients. The essence of strategy is choosing what not to do. Um, I think there are so many things that we are conditioned to think about in the nonprofit world that we really need to stop worrying about. That we really are too concerned about hitting those metrics, about timing things perfectly, about doing what we have always done, and it's time to take a deep breath. And that's sort of at the heart of the don't worry philosophy that I'm trying to bring to my work, to my clients, and through webinars like this, into the field at large. So, how does that apply to grant writing? What are the things that we should be worrying about and not worrying about? This is my short list of things we should spend time on, and I'm going to go into each one of these shortly. These are the things that I really think about when I'm working with clients, and the things that have really mattered to my clients when they are on a winning streak. Um, and each one sort of has some correlations of what not to do. So I think digging in is the place to start. Being ruthless about eligibility is one of the first places I struggle with new clients when we're really getting started, when clients are coming with a list of grants that they're very excited about. When board members send opportunities to my clients, and when people get really excited about a new opportunity, eligibility is the first place I look. It does not make any sense for you or your organization to worry about opportunities for which you're not eligible. This is not a job application. The 3 to 5 year suggested experience can't be, toggled, and maybe you can factor in the internship or that volunteer job. That doesn't count really with eligibility and grants. There are too many. There are too many competitors in the field to hope that they'll just let you in if there is a point of eligibility that eliminates you from right off the bat. This could mean that you are just under or just over the suggested size of the organization. If they say they want organizations that are only over $1 million in annual revenue or expenses, that's it. That it has to be 1 million. If they only want organizations in a certain county or in a certain state, oftentimes if you're serving that county or state but not located in that county or state, they're not going to let you in. They're not going to consider it. These are really big sticking points, and I've seen my clients get very excited about opportunities that require them to have an audit. And my smaller clients, many of them don't have independent audits of their financials yet. It is absolutely something to keep at the forefront. Don't spend extra time Don't spend extra worry on an application that has already said that your organization is probably going to get cut in the first round. That said, if there are things where there are edge cases, where may have been a change in how funding patterns had worked versus how they seem to work now. If you're finding that there are plenty of organizations on their lists of recent funders, recent awardees that are from out of state but are serving the area, give the program officer a call. This is the time when you need clarification, and it's worth it to everyone for you to take that extra minute. So be ruthless about it, but be ruthless once you really have a firm idea of what those things are. And if you get through eligibility, the next thing to really think about is knowing what you need from that funder and knowing when you'll need it. And this is, really as you're building a grant calendar, it's really important to think about when you're going to be getting these decisions and when the money is going to come in. Don't rely on a single on time decision to make sure that you get the money to just start the program. It may not happen. The funders all the time will say that they expect decisions to be communicated to you in 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 10 months, 18 months. I've seen them all. And sometimes funders are late. Sometimes things are going on in their offices that are out of their control, and certainly that are out of your control. Relying on a specific date or a specific deadline, and the only grant you've applied for is hanging in the balance, it's a risk that is probably not worth taking. Instead, when you are crafting your grant calendar, if you're thinking ahead, planning early, staggering your asks, making sure that some things are coming in 1 month and that you'll have time to apply if you get no's, so that in a few more months you get the rest of the money. That is probably the best way to handle it. Um, and understanding that you may have to shift program dates as well. So this is a really important thing to talk about with your program officers, internally with your teams, making sure that you know exactly when they're going to need the money and making sure they know not to spend the money ahead of the actual award coming in. Of course, knowing why you need the money is also important. This seems like a no-brainer, but I have seen organizations asking for money for the same amount of money from different funders. They're looking to fund the same thing, and they are asking multiple people for that money. If you get all of that money and it was all allotted to the same aspects of the same program, the same budget lines, you're going to have to turn it down or some of it down and really only take what you need. You can't double dip. Um, and it can be really exciting to get a lot of yeses or even multiple yeses. And it's a good problem to have. But you certainly don't want to put yourself in the position where you're either constantly saying no, or that you are turning down money that you could use for something else. If you get ahead of it and you plan right, you can tweak your application budget so those requests don't overlap. You can ask funder A for staffing and materials. You can ask funder B for consultant work and fees for venue rentals, whatever those things are. And then if those things don't come in, hopefully you already have a contingency plan for how to fund the rest of the program, whether that's from general operating funds or from unrestricted awards or unrestricted donations. You can twist those things and make sure that you get everything covered. It's much easier to do when you're tracking that along the way, and when you're asking these organizations for funding. If you know what you're asking for and where your budget gaps are. If some funding comes through and some funding falls through, what are the next set of applications you're going to need to put together? Having that all tracked and on hand is very helpful. Focusing on the funder is also really important. Hopefully, you are all thinking about the funder's mission and the funder's purpose in granting this money. But it's really important to think about not necessarily always prioritizing the messaging that you have established in order to write a compelling narrative. Think about tailoring that to the funder. don't just talk about your programs the way you've always talked about them. Think about what the funders, think about what the funder really wants from the investment that they're going to be making in your organization. How are you going to move the needle that they're focusing on? It's really great to be able to use and reuse content, whether that's from your marketing team, whether that's from old applications from, to other funders. But if you don't really think about the way that your independent relationship with this funder could exist, you're leaving a lot of time on the table. You're leaving a lot of opportunity on the table. And while it is nice to be able to not worry about, recrafting and recrafting every piece of narrative, as you start thinking about things, it does become clear what makes the most sense to use and reuse, and then what you really need to focus on recrafting every time, or at least reinvestigating every time, so that you are spending your time wisely as you put that narrative together. Building relationships is absolutely important in the process as well. Packing your grants calendar with funders that don't know you from a list of anyone, it means that you're constantly asking cold. You're constantly trying to establish a relationship with only what you're putting on the paper. And that's a tall order. Sometimes that's going to work, sometimes it's not. And while there are funders who don't want any communication with any of their potential awardees before the process starts, there are plenty of them that are happy to have calls, to have visits, to talk to you about what you're doing and to talk about what the opportunities may be. A lot of times, the stewardship can really look a lot like stewardship for major donors, where you're making a plan for how these organizations are investing in what you're doing and how, again, you are helping their mission move forward in the world. Also, taking the time to find connections between potential funders and the people that are already closest to your organization is really important. With the biggest opportunities you have, send a note to the board. See if anybody knows the trustees or any of the program officers. Talk to your staff and leadership about connections they may have. But also think about connections between your volunteers and donors. You're never going to be able to ask everyone every time, but it is a great place to see where those connections may exist, where someone may have had a previous relationship with somebody involved in the organization. And you may actually find that there's more common ground than you thought. So when you're crafting that narrative and you're thinking about what you really need to put in, don't shy away from transparency. Don't shy away from the sort of the tough realities. While I am absolutely a proponent of strengths-based language, especially when you're talking about your constituents, not sharing the actual challenges that your organization may be facing may leave opportunity on the table. There are plenty of funders out there who understand leadership transitions and um, new and recently exposed changes to other funders' priorities. They want to know that they are going to be helping for a reason, and crafting the perfect "we're great and we can handle everything" story may not always be the best way to go. It's important to make sure that your capacity to manage the grant, manage the funds, and bring the outcomes into the real world. It's really important. You have to be able to make those things clear. And it's also important to show the funder very, very much on the page, not buried in your website or your annual report or an attachment, what's going on. Knowing that those things are transparent gives them a sense of confidence in what you're doing and that the reports they're going to be getting are going to be just as transparent. So focusing on this and telling those things straight up, being really realistic about your capacity, I think is very important. And it's worked with my clients, especially in tackling some bigger organizational challenges. Build your apps, your applications to really reflect your programs and your evaluations. Um, don't worry so much about the funder's goals that you create problems later for your programs team and your evaluations team. Maybe they're the same group, maybe they're not. Um, but if you create an application that ignores what your teams are actually doing day to day, that doesn't take into account what data they may already be collecting or what data they may have easy access to, you're leaving potential metrics on the table that are really important to showing your efficacy, but also you are probably creating a tall hill to climb when it comes to reporting. This is an area that I think really, really changes the game for many of my clients. Really thinking about what they're already doing, what's already on the table, information you're already collecting, ways you're already collecting that information is important. And if there are things that you need for a specific funder that you don't actually tackle on a day to day basis, factor the costs of those things into the grant that you're applying for. Make sure you're asking for costs to monitor and evaluate your programs, and funders will see that you're making that stretch, that you are acknowledging that need, and that you've got a plan for expanding your capacity if they give you the money. Um, I think I had something else to say here. If I remember, I'll come back to it. Uh, this one has been really important as well. When thinking about strategy and renewing strategy, looking back after a year, considering how well a grant program is doing, making tweaks, thinking just about win rate, just about their total wins divided by your total applications, it doesn't really tell you everything. Getting a yes from a funder is important, absolutely, but it is something that you can't fully control. And it doesn't tell you how much money those funders are giving you. It doesn't tell you how many new funders you've brought in, how many returning funders you've retained. It doesn't tell you about the cost it's taken to apply. If you are spending, if your organization spends an entire year's worth of salary on a grant program that only churns out 4 or 5 grants a year because that's what they can afford, that's how your time breaks down, that can be really fine. But if you're spending all that time on 4 applications and you're not getting all 4, what does that really look like from a return on investment? Um, that's this last bullet here on this page. It's important to know exactly how much it's costing to apply to these things. As an external consultant, I constantly talk to my clients about the ROI. I don't apply for things for them that cost them a lot of money, that aren't going to return a lot when the award comes in. And it's important to think about those things. And if there are ways that you can improve what time you're spending, you can reduce the time it takes to report. You can increase the number of applications you're getting out, and you can increase the efficacy of those applications. Then that ROI goes up, and I think it's a much better case for grant writers across the board to make than just a win rate. And it's telling you so much more about really what you're bringing in and how that stacks up against all the other things you're doing for development. So these are the things that I say, and we've talked about them a little bit already. It's time to stop worrying about. You don't need to apply for every grant that you're eligible for. You don't need to create programs just to go get a new grant. I love to remind clients that, if there's a baker who finds a great deal on tires, selling those tires out of the bakery probably isn't a great new business line, even if they can sell them at a good price. People aren't going to be thinking about the bakery when it's time to buy tires. On the other hand, if the bakery has a really great Italian chef in the back that knows how to make great pasta, and they can invest in a new pasta machine and have a completely new line of business that expands from breakfast bakery to dinner and lunch bakery, well, maybe that's not bad. those are the things you have to think about when you are looking at new grant programs and you're thinking about how to fund new opportunities for your organization. Really focusing on not selling tires as a bakery is a big deal. Um, Not only is that important for you as someone in development, but for the rest of the organization as well. Um, really focusing on your internal message over those funder goals, I think that is spending that much time on how you all as an organization have decided to talk about your organization can really trip you up. Um, Applying for general operating funds only, as much as they are great and they are absolutely necessary, and more funders are taking them seriously and taking the need for them seriously, really thinking about how you can apply for strategically planned restricted funds may make sense, especially when you're going after a new funder. Highlighting your needs without highlighting your strengths. That kind of goes back to that balance between the strengths-based language and being transparent. And don't wait till reports are due to start collecting data. Time things, talk to your program officers, get those things done systematically over the course of a year. So that you can avoid that worry of we have 2 weeks to the report and we don't know if the program did what it was supposed to do. Anything you can do to build some efficiency there can be really important. So I can talk about a few organizations I've worked with. I've got 3 case studies. Um, so this first one, it's an arts organization with both performance and community service aspects is in their programs. The the big concern that they had is that the local arts funding, it was saturated with requests. Lots of really big organizations, very well known national level performance groups, uh, which means the competition for any money for performance funding is very high. On top of which, there isn't enough staff capacity to tackle all the big grants and all the little grants. But the little grants are really important. It still makes sense to think about those $10,000 grants if that's what your organization needs, if those relationships are going to be important to your organization long term. So what worked when tackling the strategy was increasing focus on grant funding for the direct service portions of their work, where earned income isn't of from a performance isn't offsetting any costs, and where there are more funders who are interested in things like arts education. Um, Staff and an external grant writer split the high profile competitive grants, and a qualified volunteer jumped in and handled smaller things, making sure that those two, five, $10,000 grants had someone applying for them, but there wasn't as much time, staff time, and external writer time going into the actual drafting of those things. Um, that meant that there was time and energy to find a new local funder that committed to a 5-figure award that's going to renew every year, that so long as their programs keep running. um, really thinking through ways that you can share the load, that you can optimize what time you're spending and why you're spending it, is important to this kind of situation. Not only are you really going to need to make sure that those most competitive grants are in your control as the grant writer, but you're going to need to make sure that you are making the right cases to the right funders, and that you are going to be the biggest fish in the pond as wherever possible. And that was the case here. There aren't enough dollars available to enough performance companies to make it make sense to really focus the grant program only on performance in this case. This is something that I see in other areas as well. You can probably relate this across sectors in various ways. Um, if you have any questions about that, please drop them in chat. I'm happy to answer questions about these as we go along. And the second case study, this is a very well established organization that's been around for decades. They have grown and grown, and unfortunately, the tried and true grant strategy was not keeping pace with that. there were a lot of cases where they were too big for the grants that they had gotten year after year before, or where funders changed priorities and needed things that this organization could no longer provide, content wise, objective wise, outcome wise, data wise. So in this case, we really strategized, looking at new funders, and applying to those new funders with restricted requests, knowing that knowing that not all of these funders would be really ready to jump on the general operating fund bandwagon. At the same time, we appealed to the more established relationships looking for general operating funds and talking about how effective those dollars are for the organization, and really relying on the relationships that had been built, saying, you know that our outcomes are as strong as possible. You know how we work and why we work, and you can trust that this money is going to be really put in the right place, and that it's going to fuel some important work in our organization. This especially important, programs and development work together to really rethink how the organization could talk about the metrics and objectives that were included in almost every application. Sometimes we go back to those things and revisit, but really making sure that those big ticket items are talked about ahead of time to make sure that the programs understands exactly what they're needing to collect, and knowing in development knows that they can state that these are the goals without having to ask every time. Getting that work done ahead of time saved a lot of time with every successive application. Um, and it meant that it's saving staff time later because they know what they're going to need to track as those things happen. And when they know when the reports are coming due, they have access to that data already. They're not going back and figuring things out after the fact. The big win for this organization is that they managed to secure 50% of the funding they applied for that first fiscal year. And that is even considering, in that 50%, they lost um, a very significant award that I think most people lost last year. So that 50% is really, even skewed with that sort of big dollar loss that nobody thought we were going to win. But it's still really important. 50% is still very strong. And very importantly, that 50% aligned very closely with the goals for the year for the funding. So, we knew going in what we needed, and that 50% brought in what everyone was hoping for. Case study number 3, relationships over ratios. So this organization is, again, fairly well established, a few decades in. They're very much scaling growth up, up, up. And they have a program that spans multiple states and regions, which has been a challenge because their regional funders that they relied on before have been less likely to give unrestricted awards to organizations that are working out of region. So if you have a headquarters in New York, you're running a program in New Hampshire, you may not be getting unrestricted funds from either a funder in New York or New Hampshire. And that has been a real challenge, figuring out how to make sure that those unrestricted dollars are coming in, that the restricted dollars are going to all the right places. And what it took is careful, slow building of one-on-one relationships with more significant national funders, that were interested in systems change, not direct service, and getting those organizations on board slowly but surely to really bring in some very significant funding that was multi-year. Um, that basis allowed the development department to then think about regional requests that built really great relationships with smaller funders in specific areas that were giving restricted funding for programs being delivered in those regions. This organization last year secured 88% of the funding they requested. So this is very much working for them. It has taken them a long time to get here, but focusing the strategy on those relationships and allowing others one staff member was really focusing on a lot of the relationships, and it allowed others to really go back and focus more on those smaller relationships, the smaller requests. And divvying that work out really worked very well, making sure that there was always something going on, making sure that everyone felt that their contributions were important, even if they were applying for very small grants. Those grants were really important to those particular regions and were covering costs in regions that really needed it. In the meantime, those big six-figure grants felt fantastic, but they also need to see that those organizations need to see that there's other funding coming in from other sources as well. Um, so that combination really paid off for that organization in the past year. And that is what I have for right now. I don't see any questions in the Q&A. Claire, I don't know how you'd like to run Q&A if we don't have any on the table right now.
Yeah, I think just give people a few moments to type in any questions that they may have.
Yep.
I have a couple of questions now in the Q&A box. I can read them.
Sure.
The first one is, can you say more about finding, pursuing grants for general operating? We don't do a lot of direct program activities.
Yeah. So when I am searching for grants, I am doing research for my clients. I depend a lot on my instrumental subscription. I love it. It is absolutely the place that I go for most of my research. Um, it can be challenging if you don't see a lot that is open to you. It's hard to, in some sectors, find more operating dollars. There are funders who are encouraging encouraging others to offer more. If you're not seeing them, if it's not clear that they're being offered, um, have some conversations with your close funders. Build the relationships and talk to them about the things you really need. If we, as the development people, aren't providing some of that feedback to the funders that we work with, it can be hard for them to know that what we actually need is not more program dollars, it's more operating funds. While it has been a trend, I think it's also important to make sure that you're connecting um, with the funders and giving them the feedback from what's working, and sometimes making the case informally or formally to get those dollars when they may not be officially on the table. I saw a note in chat. What subscription? Instrumental. I'll put this in. I'll put um, the spelling in the chat there. That's the subscription based grant research database that I use. Um, okay, I think that was all I had for that question.
The next question, how do you recommend managing all the grants and timelines?
I think there are a number of good ways to do it. I think it depends on what your organization needs. My clients have various methods that work for them. I think the important thing to know is how your team works with collaboration and structure. Some organizations really need an external subscription, something like Instrumental or Grant Hub, or there are several different grant management programs where you can put in all your deadlines, you can get reminders. They really work for some organizations, and for others, they're just too much money. And honestly, they all only work when you spend time maintaining them and making sure that everything's up to date. So if your team isn't working well with those, then sometimes spreadsheets are fine. Don't be afraid of a really good tracking spreadsheet. I like to use a Gantt chart when thinking about how money is coming in, and really sort of looking down the line of, okay, here's when the money's coming in for this grant, and being able to see how that sort of applies, how that lines up with all the other things I'm doing that month. Um, and making sure that, I'm looking at those timelines, figuring out what's coming in, how long I have to report, how long that money is sitting around being used. That's something that, if you're interested, shoot me an email. My email will be in the next couple of pages. I'm happy to share some of the templates I use for that. They are not proprietary. It is just me playing on Excel, getting things done. Um, and that's worked. Timelines, and as far as timelines and reporting goes, I found a lot of success building some reporting templates ahead of time with my clients for their program teams, where I take the application and I write a report template or a chart or something, and I say, okay, here's the data we need on this date, and I leave space for somebody to put it in, and I make sure that's on the shared server. And then a month or 2 months before that report is due, I do some sort of check-in or a halfway point. If it's a whole year, I do some sort of check-in, make sure that everybody knows where that data is coming from, making sure that we're going to have that information when possible. These are things that if you kind of do it ahead of time and your program teams know what needs to happen, it can be an email, not a meeting. And isn't that everybody's favorite thing? I use that a lot, especially because I'm not there in the office with my clients. So when I'm talking to their staff, I really need to make sure that these are things that are clickable, easy to access. You open it up, you drop the information in, you move on, you're done. When reporting works like that, it's just a dream for everybody. But it does take that setup ahead of time and really um, thinking about the what the program team is going to need at the application point, and then taking that application and using it to build the report templates so that you can keep moving, knowing exactly what the funder saw, knowing exactly what the funder's looking for at the end of the day.
Great. So another question that came in, what advice do you have for pursuing larger funding opportunities, i.e. Walton, Gates, Ford, in which it is extremely competitive and there are fewer opportunities to network and create connections with individuals within the foundation?
Hmm. Um, I don't actually have exact experience going after one of those larger funders with no connections. The organizations I've worked with that have landed some of those bigger fish, if we want to use that term, have had some connections there. I think sometimes in those cases, getting creative, getting, not getting creative in the sense that, you show up at their office with your prospectus, getting thinking about where those funders are presenting, where they're having opportunities to have conversations. I know a lot of the organizations where those relationships are very strong. Some of them have had travel budgets, so they're going to meetings, they're going places where they can be face to face with individuals from these organizations. And that can be a real challenge for smaller organizations, which is why most smaller orgs don't land those kind of opportunities. Um, Sometimes it's just going to be a long haul cultivation. You find someone who's connected, you find a way to have a conversation with them, and you build a relationship with them until the point where you can ask for that entree. And in some ways, I think thinking of them like those major donors is important. If you wanted to speak to one of those, to somebody in the on, to somebody at that level as a major donor, you might have to build relationships with 2, 5, 10 people until you find the right relationship that then allows you to make that ask of an introduction to move forward. So I think that could be a possibility as well.
I have a question. If we attended an info session, should we mention that in the grant application?
I don't think it's usually necessary. First, I think that a lot of the organizations that are running info sessions are keeping track of who's there. A lot of times when you're registering for one, you put your organization title or your title and your organization in the registration form. Um, I haven't seen it matter or not matter. And if you think about what the organization is, how they're going to be reviewing things, um, sometimes you'll have a rubric depending on the grant program. You may have a rubric to look at to see how they're scoring things. That's definitely true at the federal level. Almost none of those rubrics talk about having joined the info session. Um, those that have cared often have a checkbox in a portal or have already captured your name, um, and know that you were there. I think that if you are concerned about that and there's a way to make a reference back to something discussed at that info session, that's totally fine. I think that's a great way to, that's the same kind of references that you would make if you were saying, if you were using, you were repeating their mission in your language, as as our organization agrees, XYZ is important. It reflects their mission. As heard in this info session, this is what you care about. This is why we care about it too. That may make sense. But I don't think most are really using those info sessions as sort of a checkbox for extra points. It's important. It's usually the stuff they can tell because your application is actually put together well and has information that was discussed in those info sessions, I think is the point where it really becomes clear.
We have a question also in the chat. What resources have you leveraged for your own continued learning and professional development? Any
Hmm.
great books, articles, newsletters, etc.?
I love my Grants Professional Association membership. It has really served me well over the years. The professional development opportunities as a member have been really important, really engaging. Their backlog of webinars is fantastic. I also try to virtually attend their conference every year, which is in November, I believe. I've only ever been able to attend virtually, so I don't have the in-person experience, which I've heard is great. Um, but I really always find some great takeaway there. Um, I do actually a lot of professional development online. Um, I would, hmm, if I'll say this, I don't actually have any books on my desk that I could recommend off the top of my head. But I'll say this. If any of you are interested in signing up for my newsletter, I'll put a few books in the newsletter this next week so you guys have them. Because I think that is also an important thing. And there are some that I do really like, and I'm sorry I don't have them offhand.
Great, and I can throw your newsletter link in the chat now as
Perfect.
well as in the follow-up.
Yeah.
Oops, that's the wrong link. I'm sorry. This is the newsletter link.
And it is also linked in the slides. I'll be getting there. Um, and so when you get the follow up, if you'll have the slides for the presentation, and the link will be in there too for the newsletter.
Just got a question come in from someone. Do you know the process for qualifying to apply for federal grants?
That is a huge can of worms. That would be, I think, an entire presentation. It depends very much on eligibility. And there are going to be, those eligibility standards are very high. And they're very strong. Most of them do not move. Most of them are written into law. So it can be really challenging. But um generally you need to be SAM registered, have your UEI ID, have those things all done. I would strongly suggest that you do some review and research. There are some great webinars, there's some great resources. GPA has a lot on applying for federal grants. um and there are a lot of standards that you have to adhere to in your accounting. So I would really make sure you're having a conversation with your whole team, your accountant, your CFO, whoever that is on that side, making sure that you can provide accounting standards that are up to date, but also making sure with your programs team and your leadership that you've got everything you need to do any reporting requirements all ahead of time, all before you get everybody excited that this is really a possibility. And then read that, read the NOFA, read the NOFO extremely carefully. There are many resources that can help get to the bottom of things. I've had really a lot of luck with program officers providing some amazing ad hoc technical assistance. It depends office to office. Um, but I've seen some really good things there. And I think you just have to really know what you're doing when you get started. Um, and be really prepared to be transparent about how you're using the money, and honestly be up against as much stiff competition as everyone is with the with foundation awards. It's pretty similar.
Great. Another question came in from someone. I keep hearing that grant funding has changed post-pandemic. Do you agree? What have you noticed that's changed?
I think there are so many trends in giving. It can be hard to pin any one of them to the post-pandemic world specifically. Um, I think that there are some funders that were very much adamant about you presenting in person to apply, that do that online or that have changed that expectation. I think there are funders that are used to doing site visits, and those are very much virtual. Some, not all. Um, I think there is a lot of talk about general operating funding. There is a lot of talk about really getting away from this idea that overhead is bad. Um, and I am 100% in favor of making sure what overhead is necessary to run your programs. Because it's not that nonprofits are running with a ton of extra fat. No nonprofit is that very few, if any, are really running with lots of money to spare. If we were, why would we be going after grant money? It's so hard. Why would we be doing it? So I think there's a lot of talk, and I think that it's hard to see some of the grant trends so close to pandemic timing. We're not that far out. Eh, and some grant programs take 6 to 8 months to just hear back. So it's hard to know, where really post-pandemic started. Um, and it's hard to see, I think, so close. I think we're more likely to know in another 2 years what really changed with the pandemic. Um, I'd like to say that there's still a lot of focus on, DEI, making sure that organizations are really talking to their constituents about what their constituents want, making sure that the constituents have a voice in design, delivery, and evaluation. I think that has been increasing. Is that pandemic related? Probably not. Is that, related to many other trends, I think, in how we're talking about services? Yeah. Um, and I think there's a lot of focus on data. I think that is not going away. Um, I think that's a challenge for a lot of organizations that, everyone's trying to manage. Um, I don't think I've got anything else there. But yeah, there's some interesting conversations happening. I'm not leading them myself. Um, but I think there are changes, and I think the next 10 years will be really interesting looking back. That's, that will probably always be the case. But I think the next couple of years are going to be a really, really interesting time if we look back at them later.
I'm not seeing any questions that are still open. So I suppose we can wrap up.
Yeah.
Let's just thank you, Victoria, once again for your great presentation.
Absolutely. So, just a little plug, I do have a newsletter. I'd love you to join and take on a year of Don't Worry. It's going to be my focus for a while with my clients. Really trying to focus on spending time doing the things that matter and moving away from the things that don't. Really making the best use of our time as grant writers, as development professionals, and getting the best results we can while we're doing it. Not just taking more vacation, but making the work really matter. So the QR code should link right to the sign up form for that, or there's this little URL down there as well. This was the URL that Claire sent in chat. And thank you. I really appreciate you guys being here and the chance to have this conversation, and to share a little bit about what I do and how I think and how my clients are doing well in the real world. I'd love to continue the conversation, so please reach out to me. Check out my little page, my little Don't Worry hub on my website, where I'm going to be posting links to articles that have been published and other webinars that I'll be hosting this year. You can snag 15 minutes free with me. I don't share this unless I've had some sort of contact with a person. So all of you are welcome to grab 15 minutes on my calendar if you want to talk to me about potentially using my services, or just asking a question. And also I'm on LinkedIn, so please connect. I'd love to talk to you all there, and keep the conversation going.
Great, thank you. And thanks everyone for attending. Hope to see you at a future MNN event and have a great rest of your day.